There are things that I would like to address in this hot and age old topic, which really it's been around since the dawn of the iPhone, almost, which is in itself ridiculous because a lot of the things and arguments just don't exist anymore. They're not. Firstly, even the big YouTubers aren't addressing any of these, at least from what I know, and the ones I've watched have a level of bias. There is such a huge spread of misinformation and wrong terminology that nobody's correcting, and immense stupidity of this topic, if you ask me. I don't have a script for this, and that's intentional, partly. I will, however, be time-watching, as an earlier attempt of recording this, I spent over an hour and a half. So there will be plenty that I miss. I will put shortened taglines on the screen and fill in anything I miss I catch. Oh boy. iPhone versus Android is a stupid comparison. Why is this? Well, first of all, you've got to understand that Android versus iPhone. iPhone is a phone. Android is an operating system. You can't compare. You're comparing hardware to hardware. I understand. I'm not taking this literally. I understand what people are saying. But if you're going to argue seriously and argue good points, it's a good idea to first know what you're talking about to that level. Because iPhones are just one phone. They're a line from one individual company. Android devices are hundreds in number, and they vary from £70 all the way up to way over any Apple flagship in existence, with all kinds of features. People go on about Face ID. Some Android devices have retina scanning. Wear a mask or anything, it scans your eye. Now, if you want to talk about sophistication, and iPhones and iOS and Android are two very different operating systems meant for different people and different things. iMessage is a good example, but I'll get to that. So, yeah, maybe let's start with the elephant in the room. The thing that people go on about the most. Cameras. Now, this is illogical, if anything. It doesn't make any sense at all. Because a camera, people go on about camera quality. A camera is a camera, not post-processing. Post-processing is something else. Post-processing is when data is taken off of a sensor, it's processed into a file and formatted. Then post-processing is when a program takes that already created data and changes it. So, for example, my Canon EOS R, if I have it set to JPEGs, it adds color science, it adds all of that Canon-y stuff that people love. But if I have it set to RAW, there is no post-processing. None. Absolutely no post-processing and no compression. However, I'm not ignoring the fact that compressed RAW files do exist. It saves all of the data from the sensor. It does absolutely nothing else to it. Not something I can say for mobile operating systems. iOS has just the same amount of post-processing as Android does. The reason why I'm focusing on post-processing is because post-processing is the final image. It is not what the camera actually sees. What Android does, typically, is it takes the image. So, phone sensors, and this has a lot to do with size as well, and physics. I'm going to try and keep this as simple as I can. They're soft. When they take images, they're soft. So what the phones do is they add sharpening, and then they also remove a noise. So they add denoise, which, in a noisy scene, all that noise is, you can't separate noise from detail, so it removes all of the detail as well. Which is why phones have never been good at taking images in low light, because it denoises all of the detail out. You can recreate a phone image simply in Lightroom by doing nothing else to color or anything to that extent. You up sharpening to 75%, then you set luminescence, which is Lightroom's denoise, basically, to 30, and you've practically got a phone image. And if you want a night shot, all you have to do is just max out sharpening and up luminescence to maybe 50%. By that point, it's not a usable image. I can pixel peep on a camera. I cannot pixel peep on a mobile phone image because there are no pixels to peep. That is what we're talking about here. So camera-wise, you've got, on the iPhone, you've got a 12 megapixel camera. And on most devices now, Android devices, specifically flagships, you've got 108, 105, 70 megapixels, 50 megapixels, 48 megapixels. If I'm getting a camera, which one do you think I'm going to choose? 12 megapixels, or now with a 14 Pro, 48, or am I going to choose 108 plus an optical zoom with no digital zoom? It's an obvious choice. I'm going to go for the Android, aren't I? Android device. Now, color science, the reason why people go on about Apple iPhone images being so good, that is the color science. Apple color science is incredible compared to other mobile devices. But since I use Lightroom, which I think really anybody should be using Lightroom if you're even semi-serious about taking pictures on a phone, then color science is out of the window anyway, because you're going to be editing your own images for a start. So what's the point in color science anyway? So even then, still, Android is the clear winner here. I'm sorry, it just is, on a technical level, and literally in that regard. So actually, no. iPhone cameras are worse than every single Android device. Flagship, main industry leading, Samsung S22, Oppo X5, now the X6 coming along, Huawei, yeah, all better technically than iPhone's free Sony module arrangement. So now that's put to bed. Oh, what else? Oh, iMessage. iMessage is another good one. iMessage. I read the other day, I don't know how accurate this is, that in 2020, 74% of 18 to 24-year-olds in the United States of America have iPhone devices. Now, I can't tell you how nuts this is to me as a Brit and also as a European, because here there are more Android devices, or if not just about equal as there are Apple devices. iMessage, Blue Bubble, how iMessage works is in exactly the same way Google's R.C.S. works. iMessage, you've got green bubbles, which is SMS, MMS, aka paid. Blue bubbles, which is, how can I put this? It's WhatsApp, but built into text messaging. And it's integrated into text messaging as well. That's it. That's all it is. So the fact that people want a blue bubble is absolutely ridiculous. You've got to understand that what you're doing is you're not saying that you want a blue bubble just because it's secure, because you've got end-to-end encryption, you've got chat features. You're saying you want it because Android is worse, anything other than Apple is worse. That is something I'm going to say for a bit, because R.C.S. literally gives Google users, or just, in fact, anybody who has Google's default messaging application, text message application, because it's baked in, a reason to what's the word? To just profile Apple users. That's the wrong terminology, but it's what's in my head at the moment. Because R.C.S. is everywhere. Everybody's going to be using it. It's not locked. It's not behind a garden of Eden. And it's like, let's look at it with a touch of reality here. Also, by the way, if you back up your stuff to iCloud, end-to-end encryption is also backed up, so Apple can see all of your data. And anybody who gets into your iCloud also gets all of your data. And that's forgetting that there was an application a while ago on the App Store that was selling user data to Tencent, but ignoring that, whatever, the design. Okay, so call me a conspiracy theorist, which probably most likely 99.99% isn't a conspiracy. Is that Apple know what works. They know what works, so they're milking it for everything. For example, removing the headphone jack. I've seen plenty of people now say that they remove the headphone jack for water, because there's less places for water to get in, and fewer people who say maybe or possibly. That is a load of bollocks. It just is. It has been since the 90s. The main reason I see, at least, that Apple would remove the headphone jack is that it gives people an incentive to buy AirPods. No other reason. Which pains me, because my current headphones, which are in front of me right now, are cheaper than AirPods, and these can be used in a studio. Any studio, television, to any capacity, and AirPods can't. That's just a fact. You can't argue with me on that. Usability, ecosystem. Oh, before I get to that, Bluetooth. Connectivity. Oh, here we go. So, connectivity. You cannot, out of the box, connect iOS to Android. You can pair devices. However, you cannot send and receive data. That is just how it is. You can stream using Bluetooth on iOS, but you cannot file share. There is AirDrop, obviously. I don't know whether it uses Bluetooth, but as far as I'm aware, it's Wi-Fi. It's a Wi-Fi thing. I came across this because I tried sharing some pictures with somebody using an iPhone a while back. Our phones paired, because like, oh, maybe we need to pair our phones, and then nothing came up at all when sharing images. And after researching this, I found out, and I was actually surprised, amazingly, I don't get surprised at things, that it's doing that isn't physically possible, because Apple devices use proprietary Apple Bluetooth. They don't use industry standard, which is simply amazing. And I see Apple users actually, with Android devices, install software to share files to their computer. And I'm thinking, why are you doing that? Why don't you just get a USB lead, plug it in, go into File Explorer, and then just get the files you want? And I use my phone fairly often as a USB stick, stand-in for a USB stick. And it's 128 gigabytes, my phone. My next one hopefully will be 256. And it's over USB, which has way better capacity than Lightning. And it was invented by Apple. Yet, all of Apple's other devices use USB-C, and their iPhones don't. Why is that? Also, Mag, or whatever it was called, old Macs used to use. That was great. Nobody else can use that, because Apple, as far as I'm aware, still own the rights to use their magnetic power cables and cords. Again, yes, I have thoughts on that. Which brings me on to the ecosystem, usability, lock-in features. Apple is a Garden of Eden, and it advertises itself. I find Samsung's adverts hilarious, absolutely hilarious. Like the Flip 4, for example, coming to won't be seen on an iPhone, coming to a phone that won't be in your pocket. These adverts, they're not made to get people. I'm sure plenty of people are watching them thinking, oh, they're just targeting Apple. No, they're not. They're not targeting Apple. What they're doing is they're making people who already own those devices feel justified and just justifying with people who already own those devices for owning those devices. That's what it is. Meanwhile, Apple, I must say, really disappoints me with their adverts, because like the whole iStore thing and the whole speed thing. I mean, Apple are doing exactly the same as Samsung are doing, but Samsung have a point. Apple don't. It's like they're a flailing little child with nothing in the air to punch. Like, Android phones, okay, yes, the A15 is just ever so slightly reworked A14, which also suffered from overheating and all kinds of stuff to that extent. But the A16, these chips are powerful. I don't deny that. But Snapdragon is fast. And we're talking about Snapdragon chips in devices with often better cooling than iPhones do. For example, iPads often perform better than iPhones do, despite having the same CPU and the same setup, because iPads are better cooled. From looking at benchmarks, I can tell you, on paper does not equal actual performance or actual usability, but they are going to be about the same, both in experience of using them. Not experience. User experience, not my personal experience. User experience of using them versus Apple they're going to be the same. And I must also include Windows here, because what Windows does, how Windows and how search boxes traditionally work is you open them, then you type in the list or the application you want, and then it searches your hard disk for them. What Windows does is it stores all of that stuff in RAM. So when I press, for example, the Windows key, it opens instantaneously. That's not fast loading. That's because it's already loaded. That is called optimization. Which, again, Android, it's not the most optimized thing on the planet, and it's also quite heavy. And that's in part to do with the features that it has and the abilities you can do with it, and the extent of which you can stretch the operating system, which, by the way, Android started out as a smart camera operating system before Google bought it. Whereas iOS, in comparison, is a dedicated, specifically produced operating system for mobile phones. It can only operate as a mobile phone. Slowly over time, it's been getting features that you'd expect from desktops. However, Android already is a desktop. You can plug it into an extra monitor. You can already use it as a desktop. Just has a different interface, and it works in portrait. Actually, in exactly the same way Windows and main desktop operating systems can work in portrait. It's, it is what it is. Which is how, for example, Android users will sometimes, or often, depending on the type of person dealing, serious or not, that's not the point here, criticize Apple's. For example, the iPhone XR, or just the iPhone X in general, has 3 gigabytes of RAM, and that hasn't really changed. iPhones have only really just got 6 gigabytes, while Android is on 12 gigabytes. Now, it's not about how much RAM you have, it's about how it's used, as is with everything. Android would really suffer on 3 gigabytes of RAM, whereas iOS is perfectly fine with 3 gigabytes of RAM. That's how it works. It's not an apples to apples. It's not black and white. It's not this is therefore. It's not one of those situations, and it's the same with optimization. Phones now are getting minimum 4,000 milliamp hour batteries, and a lot of flagships now have 5,000. Apple, meanwhile, is still on 3,500 for their lowest ones. Apple doesn't necessarily need a 5,000 milliamp hour battery, because, as it's already been proven, the iPhone 13 Pro, or is it Pro Max? I don't know, Intel naming scheme. They can run for a good 2 days. My phone is just over 4,000 milliamp hours combined. It's VOCs and Oppo. So it's dual batteries. So it's got 2 batteries, which have power drawn from them as a single cell, but charged as a battery, which is very neat cheating way of charging phones quicker. Mine can last exactly the same. In fact, mine can last more, and I'm sure an iPhone could last longer too. Longer than that too. It's how you use the device. And it's how well optimized it is. So it's the user and it's the operating system that dictate battery battery life, not what was I going to say then? Battery shelf. Anyway, so again, it's not an apples to apples comparison. It's not black and white. However, what is black and white is the lock-in. You don't get locked in onto Android. But the reason Apple could easily support Android devices, but it won't. It won't do it. The reason why Apple won't do that is because why would you buy an Apple product when all of the Android compatible stuff are mostly half the price with the same amount of features? Why would you do it unless you're an Apple fanboy? And that's lock-in. If you're in the Apple ecosystem, you won't do it. You can't do it. And if you try to leave, you're leaving behind. I upgraded an old 3-in-1 MacBook Pro for somebody. They had, which I believe was actually quite an expensive piece of music playing software, which wasn't supported on the newer OS X versions. That is what you get with Apple. Once your device is out of date, that's it. And if you upgrade operating system, and the developer doesn't update their software, tough luck. That's what you get in a closed ecosystem. That's what you get with iPhones and OS X. Whereas on Android, that's not really a thing. Compatibility is very Windowsy in that regard. Some things are outright incompatible. Some things are partly compatible, will run. Like, I have a piece of software which was last updated, I believe, in 2001, and after a little bit of tweaking, it works perfectly fine, and I'm on Windows 11. So again, that's lock-in for you. And with smart home speakers, with AirPods, with all of that other stuff, with the proprietary dongles, that is lock-in. And that is ecosystem. That is what Apple is. Whereas with Android devices don't have that. Samsung, they make their own stuff, but their own stuff will work across the board. That is also why the likes of Samsung, and I bring up Samsung because they're an industry leader, can't do what Apple do. Because if they started creating devices which all look the same, marginal upgrades, nobody would buy them. Absolutely nobody would buy them. But Apple, they're in a completely different market segment. They can do whatever they like. However, to look on the plus side, Apple, they go on about simplicity, but this isn't 2007. This isn't 2010. Apple isn't really a company run by engineers anymore. Let's face it. The old MacBooks, you could access the internals of those bricks by unscrewing 2 screws out of a keyboard, lifting the keyboard up, and that's it. You got access to everything. You got RAM, you got the CPU, which I don't know whether the CPUs were upgradable. I know some devices did back then, professional devices. But now, I see the S20 or S21, Samsung has less screws to disassemble the entire device than an iPhone 12 does to disassemble the charging circuitry. Don't quote me on that though. I haven't confirmed that. But I do know that that's the stuff that Apple do, and I do know that is the truth for a lot of Apple products. For example, their first ever MacBook laptop, which was a unibody, wasn't actually a unibody. It was two pieces of aluminium glued together poorly, I might add, to the extent where the fan... Now, MacBooks have always been choked for airflow because the fan just goes directly onto the hinge and it just can't really breathe properly. And that's forgetting the fact that MacBooks aren't cooled in the first place. They rely on thermal throttling to stay cool, which is why I'd never buy a MacBook for anything if I was being serious and actually had to do hefty workstation work on them. And that hot air in those Macs hit the bar, and of course that's going over the glue. So over time it would melt the glue and then it would just fall apart. And equally, in some of the hinges, they had screws. Instead of making the hinges properly, they had screws in the chassis of the screen, and even used the screen as part of the chassis as well. And bear in mind, these are very thin pieces, so there's absolutely no structural integrity. So over time, the metal round the screws would snap, and then the whole thing would just collapse. That's the type of Apple engineering that you're looking at, and it's in everything. And that's forgetting as well, not forgetting the right to repair and all that. The screens in iPhones now, they're coded to the motherboard, so you can't replace the screen or it locks features out. You can't replace Face ID or any of that circuitry because, again, it locks features. In fact, it disables Face ID entirely if you do that, and it will also pop up and say ingenuine parts. The chassis of iPhones now, I don't know about all of them now, but the reason why iPhone 11s and I think 10s as well are so costly to replace the back glass is because you have two options. You can either get a high-powered laser to burn off, to evaporate all of the adhesive because of how strong it is, and then once that's off, you've got to disassemble the entire device, literally the entire device, smash the glass off of the back, and then get a entire new back panel and just stick it on again. Now what Apple do, which they do this across the board, this is nothing new. What Apple do, instead of replacing anything specific that's broken, they replace the entire unit. So say there's a capacitor gone on the motherboard. Instead of replacing the capacitor, which in MacBooks, they have dodgy, or historically they have had dodgy capacitors which don't operate well or just break in the cold. And this was a gate, this was an Apple gate thing. You can look it up, it's everywhere. They would instead replace the entire motherboard, or they do a repair which makes it look like somebody had put the motherboard in a toaster, but it probably would only last a few months or a couple of years at any rate, because it's an improper repair. Which is why to replace the back glass on an iPhone, it costs upwards of £400, because you're not replacing, at least Apple aren't replacing the back glass. They're gutting your phone, throwing your old case away, and putting all of the inners into a new phone and then giving it back to you. That's what you get. That is what they call customer support. I don't call that customer support, and I don't call that a repair, because nothing was repaired. And I also don't think that is very environment friendly. Just, because you're not doing anything to make a device survive. All you're doing is taking something perfectly fixable, in perfect working order, and throwing it away. Just because one tiny little speck on that thing was damaged. But you could replace, and sometimes even some things aren't broken, just the solders come off and worn. So all you need to do is just resolder it, but they won't do that. Also look at, again, OS X MacBook. Somebody, it was on NBC, was it? I think it was NBC. They took in a MacBook to a Genie Bar. Ooh, again, this is the whole Apple experience, part of that. And they were quoted a new computer. What was actually wrong with it was the power, the pin for power for the backlight had come out. Now, if I was doing a repair, I wouldn't charge for that, because nothing was broken. This is what you're dealing with here, with lock-in. This is the ecosystem, this is how it is. And feature-wise, it's the same, relatively the same. You've got limited features, because it's minimalist. That's the point of it. And that's the reason why I also love iOS so much, is that it's something really anybody can use. Anybody can use it. You've got just about everything a minimalist, somebody who just wants a device to work, something when they go out and they just want to make phone calls, they just want to browse the internet. That's what an iPhone does. That's what iOS does. And that's great. For me, it's not for me, because I like to know that I can use my phone as a desktop. I like customization, but that's just me. There's nothing bad about that. There's nothing bad here. Android devices typically, on the other hand, can be repaired in a garage by a tool, using tools. But that's just another thing, and that's neither here nor there. But that's the gist of that. There's no reason here to be narcissistic or just, again, I don't remember what the word is. Just, a device is a device. It does what you want. And upgrading wise, like iPhones, again, the great thing about having something that doesn't really change, with Android devices, you get tons of new features. Every single phone is always different, always experimenting with a different design. And more often than not, there's a subtle level of learning to be done. You have to reacclimate yourself with a device. Something you don't have to do with iPhones. You also get the software support, which is again great. And you've got all that security of OS updating as well. On iPhones, you can just keep using them. Whereas with an Android, if you want updates, which again, for me, this is my preference, but I have the time to do that, and I also have the ability to do this. My previous phone was a Galaxy S6, and I had Android 10 on it. I can do that. You can't do that on an iPhone. But at the same time, you don't necessarily have to. And even once an Android device goes out of date, an old, I say out of date, once it gets to a level of obsoleteness. And again, I hate the term obsolete. Absolutely hate the term obsolete, and I'll explain why in a sec. You can just update Android devices. You can't update iOS devices. However, iOS devices, as far as I'm aware, tend to last longer. And that's also in part thanks to the software side, iOS. Whereas Androids can die. Not that I'm saying they die after 2 or 3 years. That's utter bollocks as well. Absolute rubbish. Anybody who says that has no idea what they're talking about. And should actually, to be honest, they should shut up at that point. Because they've clearly never used any good Android device. Probably cheap Chinese tack, or just budget phones. They're going to die, obviously, and just be generally poor. Which, again, Android flagships now, and even back then, were often more expensive than iPhones, with just as many features, if not, of course, now more features, many more features, smoother as well, more capable hardware-wise, to some respects, at least. It's just how it is, all this comparison, all this stuff, again, for the Apple adverts comparing speed, that's irrelevant. That hasn't been the case for maybe 11 years, over 11 years. And it's the same with security. I can remove Google from my phone. You cannot remove Apple from yours. And Apple, as we all know, is not secure. They advertise themselves as a security company. That's fine. They do have safeguards in place. So again, security. And also, the shop experience. I have more applications open to me, many, many more than you do on Apple. Many more than Apple has available to it. However, yes, it is true that Apple stuff on iStore is typically higher quality. That, to me, has absolutely nothing to do with iStore. It has all to do with the amount that's on iStore. If I go to look up, say I go to look up widgets. No, iOS doesn't really have that. If I go to look up video editors, image editors, you're just going to get maybe a small handful, right? If I look up image editors on Android, I am going to get many, many of them. And then I have to cipher through and find out which one's the best and which one works for my needs. Something that, again, different experience on Apple, and again, for different reasons. So that comparison already is out of the window. Also, plenty of third-party wrappers for Google, plenty of alternative. For example, APK Sure, is it? That website. I don't know how legitimate it is, but that is an alternative. It's a legitimate alternative to Google Play. And APK Sure, or maybe it's Pure, has history. So if I have an old Android device and I need a piece of software which isn't compatible on the newer stuff isn't compatible, but the old one is, I can just go and find it and I can just go and install it onto my phone. Because I can load and install programs like I can on a desktop. You can't do that on iOS unless you jailbreak it, or I know there are one or two other ways you can do that. I don't know what they are. Which, again, is just iOS. Android is something, it's a toy, it's a spaceship, whereas iOS is a home. It doesn't really change. It's there, you can do most things with it. But it just does it. That's it. It just does it. It's nothing special. It works. It's dependable. And that's what iOS is. Bugs, though, are ripe these days on iOS, unlike Android, which the only bug I've experienced thus far. Now, I must have a disclaimer and say, I don't use apps. I don't use applications on my phone. If I'm going to Facebook, I use Firefox. If I go to Instagram, Firefox. If I go to YouTube, I actually use YouTube Advanced, but I have nothing against using Firefox for YouTube either. And actually using Firefox has benefits over using the application because I have more features, more abilities open to me via desktop mode in Firefox, for example. Again, something you can't do on iOS, but again, that's how I work. Most people, in fact, I don't know anybody who uses Android and uses Firefox for things. I use Firefox on my phone in exactly the same way I do on Windows and on Ubuntu. That's just how it is. And the only bug I've experienced was in the past 2 months, at least, was at yesterday. Bear in mind, I use Launcher for my phone. I sort of have a semi-customized app search bar as well. When I tapped on the search bar, it refreshed. It flashed the screen as it refreshed the launcher. And that only stayed around for a while. No big deal. Absolutely no big deal at all. Whereas on an iPhone, I can tell you what is a big deal, and that is having huge connectivity issues with other devices, pairing-wise, iWatch, bad bugs. For example, iWatches, sometimes when you, I don't know which model it is, when you change your visual style on iWatches, it will flick temporarily back halfway to your original one. That, to me, as an Android user, is unacceptable. Completely unacceptable. Having a program, a camera program that often opens in black, and then once it does work, not being able to crop any images because it's stuttery and laggy, completely unacceptable. Apple is full of bugs, and for some reason, most people are passing it off. Why? Is this part of the Apple experience? Is that what you want the Apple experience to be? I can't answer those questions. Only you can answer those questions, because I don't own, and I've never owned, an iPhone. I have, however, and still do technically own an iPod, which I'm selling because it's a Gen 4. Plus, who really uses iPods today? Android doesn't have those issues. So if you buy a knockoff brand, it will have issues because yeah. But that is the reality. That is the reality of the two operating systems. They're for completely different people. I can simplify. In fact, I've made mine pretty simple, but it's still, I swipe. I don't know anybody who can properly use my phone because I don't use software buttons. I use all gestures. I know what my gestures are. I know how it's configured. Whereas on an iPhone, if you have an iPhone, most likely you've never thought of that, or you wouldn't want that, because that's not what works for you. The bling factor, the green versus blue bubbles, that is dumb. There are many stronger words, which I would use if this wasn't going on YouTube, but that is incredibly dumb. If you are one of those people who does that, who goes, oh, I miss having blue bubbles, you need, no offense, but you need a reality check, because all a blue bubble means, and I think I might have mentioned this earlier, is that it's encrypted. That's it. It does not mean I'm an iPhone user, so I'm superior, because you're not superior. In fact, Apple treats you like rubbish. That is a fact. You cannot deny that. Anybody who denies that is cotton-wooled. All an iPhone can do that an Android can't do is it's more optimized, and it can seamlessly connect between iPads, iPods, I don't know about now, and OS X devices. And you reap many benefits from that. You can't do that on an Android device easily. And even then, the closest thing to that is DeX, DEX by Samsung. And also, and you've got third-party stuff, which I don't know of any that work well enough. And there's also Windows Phone, Windows Link. That's called Phone Link, I think Microsoft have called it, which I've never used because I will not have a Microsoft account on my computer. I have this thing locked down. But what I do have is Bluetooth connectivity to everybody else, even devices made way before, at the dawn of Bluetooth. And Bluetooth can even be converted to IRDA, which for you youngsters out there who are older than me, that is what came before Bluetooth, using infrared to send and receive. And actually, in enterprise and in industry, we already had gigabit speeds with infrared. Because the only way you're going to get somebody to intercept infrared is by literally putting an infrared sender and receiver in between the infrared beam of the two devices. Just Bluetooth is more convenient. That's just how it works in technology and in developing technology. We have that for Android devices. We can do that, but you can't. But because you're in the ecosystem and all this stuff is Apple, you don't need that. That's no reason to call Android devices unsuperior. If in any case, that makes iPhones vastly down below Android capability for connectivity. But it's the experience. It's always, as Steve Jobs has said, I believe in an interview once, it's not the iPhone you're getting, it's iOS that you're getting. That is what it comes down to. And Apple have been doing great things with iOS. It's nowhere near good enough and nowhere near acceptable just yet. But I'm really, really hopeful. And I just hope and I'm grateful so far of the moving repairability that Apple has been doing very recently. And also the great waves and things Apple have invented. It's amazing. Don't know why they haven't stuck USB-C on their phones yet, considering everything else uses USB-C. It's sort of weird. I think they're just milking it again for everything it's worth. I think that's it. I think that's everything I wanted to say. But, oh yeah. One more thing though. The whole Gleam thing. You should buy normal people, and I say normal people, and I'm being blunt, and I'm being literal, and I am being serious. Normal people buy a phone, buy anything, because it's what they need. It does what they require. And that's it. I have a 2600, Ryzen 2600, paired with a GTX 1060. Now, I need an upgrade of CPU. Do you know why? Because this video is 4K, and my computer isn't powerful enough to do 4K. If I start having to work purely with 4K, I'm going to need an upgrade. But since I always deal with 1080p, what's the point? You know, for gaming, AAA titles run poorly on this thing. At max settings. But they run. So what's the issue? If I was required to run games at max settings, and I mean required, then I would need an upgrade. That's how it works. The fact that you're buying new iPhones despite your old ones being perfectly fine, is ridiculous. And people on Android do this as well. Everybody is guilty of doing this. And it's also, it also damages the environment too. You're throwing away something that's perfectly fine. Speakers, for example. You get a blown out speaker and it's like, oh, alright, I'll just buy a new speaker unit then. Or you could repair that speaker, the driver, inside the speaker unit. The speaker's fine. The speaker unit, perfectly fine. It's the driver that's gone. And those units are often held in using something called screws. And those drivers are often, this is the speaker world, bought easily and almost half the price, if not less than 3/4 the price of the entire unit itself. Let that sink in. Think about it. I have 1960s radios. My main radio is 1960s. It has never failed on me once. It's perfectly usable, listens to all the stations. So why would I buy a newly manufactured radio when I'm getting something with better build quality, made out of better materials, using electronics I can replace myself, because none of it is micro, it's all macro. And the batteries last months. Buy what works for you and don't treat people unfairly. And if you know somebody, like for example in America, where you are less likely to get a date if you have a green bubble than a blue one, don't hang around that person, they're not worth it. Still, Android's got R.C.S. now. Now we can criticize Apple users for not having R.C.S. Another aspect of the two is that the interfaces use different design languages. What do I mean by design languages? Well, if you're on Windows, you've got the taskbar, and then all of your applications, your programs appear as windows on there. When you click them, they open. That is design language. That doesn't change across devices. When you tap on a program on Linux, but the interface might be completely different, but that stays the same. That is design language. Now across iOS to Android, the design language changes almost completely. I still remember the first time that I used an iPad. It was an older iPad, granted. And at that time I was using a Galaxy S4. Now, I was showing somebody a YouTube channel of mine, and I was looking at it, going, what do I do with this? How does this work? How do I go back a page? So I was just dumbfounded looking at this thing. The screen for a few seconds, and then I saw the web browser, the classic web browser, page back, page forward, which I'd expect to see in Internet Explorer 6. And then it hit me, oh, this is mirroring a desktop interface. And then I could use it, because suddenly my mind is in the right place to use it. I know what I'm doing again. And that is the experience you get, which is why, and a lot of times people go for iOS over Android because of the simplicity. And also, some people's minds are geared differently. For example, music-wise, I have whistles, I have harmonicas, I have a concertina, I have melodians, and I've also played other diatonic instruments. What is diatonic? Diatonic is, if you know anything about music, piano's a chromatic. You have all of the notes. Diatonic is a specific key. Now, the start of the key in question is always on a push, which means, and it's always, it goes push, pull, if you have bellows. So, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti is in, out, in, out, in, out. And then, so the first note of the octave is always the key that it is. That is always the key, starting note of that key. And the last, and the second octave from the first is, again, always, so it starts on a G and ends on a G. Then you go into the next octave up, starts on a G, ends on a G. Now, because of that layout and that order, that means that I can go from playing a whistle to playing a concertina to playing a harmonica, because it's all the same. The method in which you do it is different, but the core principle of playing it is the same. On a whistle, you start on a D, you go up all the holes, and you end on a D. And then you go back down again. That would be an octave scale of the key of D. Scale the first octave of the key of D, because the most common key of a whistle is in D. I can use a Windows device, and that means that I can use a Linux device and have ground under my feet to stand on when I'm looking at it, quickly processing what I'm seeing, what's in front of me, how to use it. Whereas with iOS, if you've never used an Apple device before or seen one, and you're running on and you use Android, you're not going to know. You're not going to have any ground to stand on other than I tap app icon, app opens. So it's just fumbling around. Some people's minds work like mine. Most people's minds, in my opinion, work better than mine do, and others aren't able to comprehend to that level, which is why some people stick to Android, because it's what they're familiar with, it's what they learn. Some people have to learn the hard way how to use things, and other people can just spontaneously use them. It's called life, and iOS is better for that than Android. Full stop. There's no competition. It is better than that for Android, and it looks prettier as well. And often than not, it lasts longer. And if you just want a phone, I recommend, if you just want a phone, I recommend getting a Nokia brick. I have one. A 6230i works perfectly fine, and I use it from time to time, and it's fully compatible with my Scion, actually all of my Scion ER5 devices, 32-bit, also Epoch, the father to Symbian OS. Yes, Symbian, that thing everybody's forgotten about by now. And that's just it. That is it. Is there anything else? I don't think there's anything else. I think I've covered everything. Apple, to summarize, minimalistic, simple, and I'm not going to talk about the bugs here. Simple, minimalistic, does what you want. It's a phone. They're also incredibly powerful, just like everybody else is. They get the job done. iMessage, before R.C.S. for Android, was the most secure way, without having to have WhatsApp, which, by the way, the likes of WhatsApp are a lot of people's main messaging programs in Europe and in the UK. I know doing that isn't popular in America. And you've got the ecosystem. Everything works. Everything works together as long as it's Apple, and you get very special and very specialized features from that. If you're a sound engineer, Apple. For iOS, for Android devices, and I'm not talking about Android as an operating system specifically here. For Android devices, you get global, except for Apple, connectivity. You get global compatibility, almost global compatibility, except for Apple. You get, more often than not, the brink of technology for phones that is available commercially. Again, you don't get that from Apple. Same goes for images, same goes for software compatibility to hardware compatibility. You get the repairability, you get proper tech support, you get cheap repairs. In fact, you can buy those, often in the entirety. And you get longevity, longer than iPhone. However, use case and the phone you have, your mileage is going to vary. That's it. So which one do you want to buy? I know which one I would buy. Which one would you buy? If I've missed anything, please leave a comment saying what I've missed. I know there's obviously going to be plenty of stuff. iTunes is a good example versus Spotify. Desktop widgets, the weird implementation. I'm excited for Apple's dynamic island, though. I haven't seen anything like that before. This is why I like Apple. If you've got this far, thank you for listening, and I'm going to have a cup of tea now, I think. Yeah, I'm going to have a cup of tea, then go to bed.